Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I'm going to try and get a few questions answered, starting with this one from Ross Biff, who asked, "Hey Thor, how do you square the circle when George Lucas contradicts himself?" In a quote taken from the Los Angeles Times in 2002, he said, "I wanted to have this mythological footing because I was basing the films on the idea that the Force has two sides, the good side and the evil side, and they both need to be there. Most religions are built on that, whether it's called yin and yang, God and the devil. Everything is built on the push-pull tension created by two sides of the equation. Right from the very beginning, that was the key issue in Star Wars." However, he has also said that Anakin/Vader was indeed the chosen one because he brought balance to the Force by destroying the Sith, that is, Palpatine and himself. So on the one hand, he says the light side and the dark side of the Force are like two sides of the same coin, meaning you can't have one without the other. And yet, on the other, he says that Anakin/Vader brought about balance by destroying the Sith, which seems to result in a coin with only one side. Okay, so basically, Anakin destroying the Sith did not destroy the dark side itself. It only destroyed those who use it. And those who use it are essentially the embodiment of selfishness. They only think of and do for themselves. And when someone like that gets into a position of power, as the Sith tend to do, it brings suffering to the whole galaxy because all the Sith do, is seek to take and control almost literally everything. Palpatine and the Empire being the prime example of this. And hence, to balance that out again, the Jedi, who are the embodiment of selflessness, who only think of and do for others, they need to stop the Sith. Not destroy the dark side or anything quite like that, just stop the Sith. It can be there, the dark side can be there, as George Lucas has even said, but once you start using it, well, like Yoda says, forever will it dominate your destiny. It will control you and turn you into a Sith or something along those lines, and you will follow the steps that Yoda also once laid out for us about how fear of losing what you have, that leads to anger of someone taking what you have, which leads to hate for everyone who you now see as a threat trying to take what you have, and finally to suffering for yourself and everyone else, because all you can do is worry about losing what you have and no one else essentially has anything, certainly not freedom, so they suffer too. And that, in a nutshell, is how it all works in Star Wars. Yes, there's a push-pull tension constantly between the dark and the light, but embracing the dark side is bad and embracing the light is good. And of course the follow-up question to that is, well, why don't the Jedi cause imbalance since they just embrace the light? And that is because as the sort of embodiment of the light, they are the embodiment of selflessness. They only seek to give, and giving leads to joy for all because for them, for the Jedi, they have nothing to fear losing, and helping others is more gratifying than taking for the self. And others also have joy because in theory they have what they need or are free to pursue it. No one is essentially oppressing them and taking everything, like again in the case of the Empire. Alright, our next question then relates to that one and comes to us from Perseus Jackson, who asked, "Hey Thor, since the prequels introduced the idea of Anakin as the chosen one, in which he brings balance to the Force, doesn't that mean that any Star Wars story post-original trilogy should not have dark side villains?" And well, that's not exactly the case. As I just said, the dark side was not destroyed or anything like that at the end of Return of the Jedi. It was just the Sith who were defeated. So others, and other Sith or something just like them, could and inevitably would rise again. And I mean, one of the few things I actually really liked in the sequel trilogy was this idea, not that it wasn't already in there, mind you, but this idea that was now spoken, I guess you could say, about how the battle between the dark and the light has taken many forms over the ages and will essentially never end. That Star Wars is this never-ending battle between good and evil. That no, it wasn't like balance was going to last forever after Anakin defeated the Sith. Though that said, I do think you wanted to wait a little while on bringing Darksiders back. I think you wanted to imply that Anakin balancing the Force was something a bit more profound and impactful than a balance that didn't last all that long, or never happened at all, considering Palpatine survived and apparently had a plan in place or in motion for his death and all of that, the final order. But no, you can absolutely bring in Darksiders post Return of the Jedi. I just think you have to wait a good amount of time before you bring the Sith back or something like them, keeping in mind that as much as I understand that you might want a different sort of villain in Star Wars, that the Sith kind of get old, but Darksiders are pretty much always going to take a very similar form to the Sith. They always are going to be, as I've been saying, they're always going to be the embodiment of selfishness and seek power and to rule. They're never really going to be anything else because that is what the dark side turns them into. Alright, and moving on, our next question comes to us from Jared Poon, and since it's a tad on the long side, I'm going to sort of sum it up. They are basically asking if you have the best of intentions and something bad happens, is that a dark side action or a light side one? And on the flip side, if you try to do something bad or evil and something good or positive results from it, is that a dark side or a light side action? And there are a lot of people that sort of argue that there is no such thing as flat out dark side or light side actions or powers or abilities. There is only the intent behind them that makes them that way. That, for example, you can use a force choke, generally thought of as a dark side ability, in order to stop someone from doing great harm to someone else, or many others, and that would be okay since the result was saving others and stopping the bad person. If, say, another Jedi had seen Anakin going into the council chambers during Order 66 ready to slaughter all the younglings in there, and they thought Force Choke was the quickest and easiest and best way to stop him, and that it would work and wouldn't be countered by Anakin or something, I think most people are going to agree that wasn't a dark side action, was it? That this Jedi was just doing what they must, the only thing they could to save the lives of others. And assuming they had killed Anakin with that force choke, snapped his neck or something, what would be the difference between that and maybe fighting him head on and having killed him that way? Or even driving a lightsaber through his back to stop him that way? To stop him, say, the moment before he chopped down one of the younglings? Does it technically matter how you took his life? As long as it was in defense of another and there were no other options. And though, sure, as you even point out in the question, and is kind of the point of the question, the best of intentions don't always lead to the best of results, but intentions do matter quite a bit. You're going to punish someone differently, or maybe not punish them at all, depending on the exact circumstances, but you're going to punish someone more severely for doing something intentionally to someone else that does great harm, while you're likely going to be lenient with someone who wanted to help someone else but ended up hurting them instead. As you're also going to punish someone who tried to hurt others and failed, and maybe even somehow ended up helping them profoundly, as you kind of give in your example, which by all means everyone else can pause and read if they would like. And so, though, yes, there are powers in Star Wars, like Force Lightning, that essentially require you to be a Darksider to pull them off, unless you're Rey. I think, and yes, this could be a much greater debate, don't get me wrong, but I think as a Force user, the intent of the action and your mental state, if you're calm or if you're angry, that dictates what is dark side and light side, far more than the action itself. Which isn't to say there aren't exceptions. Again, we could go into a much, much deeper discussion on all of this about intent and results and all of that. But to put it simply, intent is what matters most for deciding, again, what is dark and light. Alright, and our next and last comment comes to us from NAYX1PZ, who asked, "Hey Thor, how would you feel about stories being told about light side, dark side Force users who aren't Jedi or Sith? In the unknown regions, perhaps, or in an area where the people are more tribal and less advanced? Would love to hear your opinion on something like that." And though, for the most part, I really like that idea and think it's a good one, I think you'd need to do something a little different with Star Wars from time to time. But you do have to be careful about just how much you're kind of changing things up. You can't suddenly have dark side users being completely different just because they're in or from another part of the galaxy, because the dark side is still the dark side no matter where it is. It is still going to consume you and turn you into an evil, selfish bastard if you use it, and you'll become something like a Sith. That's kind of unavoidable, like I was saying before. And I even think this is kind of the quandary Star Wars finds itself in right now, or going forward. I mean, your options are to repackage the Jedi-Sith dichotomy over and over again, or to change it, and along with changing it, you change what is the very foundation of Star Wars. This idea that one side is selfless and the other is selfish, and inevitably leads to you becoming something bad for embracing it, that there is nothing good about the dark side. And I'm not saying this is what you're necessarily suggesting here, to change it all up. You seem to suggest keeping it the same and maybe being less technological, which could be very, very cool. More fantasy feeling, more Lord of the Rings feeling, I guess, over more space opera feeling. But going the other route to in any way change what happens when using the dark side to imply there is a right or good way to use it, or to say that some can resist it and not be consumed by it and instead master it, instead of the other way around, being controlled or mastered by it. That's the opposite of everything George Lucas was trying to say with Star Wars. At that point, it's just not Star Wars anymore. He was trying to say that being selfish and only thinking of the self inevitably leads to suffering for everybody. That if we all think more about what we want instead of what's best for all, the world is going to be a terrible place. Which isn't to say we can or should be like the Jedi and just always give and give and give. That's not going to work either. We do need to be selfish to some degree. There are things we need to have to survive, and we need to protect those we care about. But again, the idea is when you embrace selfishness, everyone ends up suffering. And when you try to be more selfless, everyone, in theory, can win and live a good life. It's really that simple. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about any and all of this. Or feel free to ask a question for a future lightning response video. You just got to start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. Whatever you choose to do though, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.